Joining us now is Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. Scott, how are you this morning?
Hey, I'm good. How's it going today?
It's going well. I wanted to talk to you this morning because of this story that you wrote, sort of about Tony Petitti and the Big Ten's view on the college football playoff. I've been very nervous, if I'm being honest with you, about a 5+11 model where you leave too much up into the committee's hands, because I'm a big proponent that a lot of the SEC's strength is more perceived than reality. I think they're very good at the top, much like the Big Ten, and then I think the middle can be a mess again, much like the Big Ten. Is that, as you were talking to people for this story and figuring out why the Big Ten landed on this particular model? I know fairness was a big consideration, but was eliminating the decision making of a committee part of that, part of what is so appealing about the automatic qualifier model as well?
That is as big of, if not the biggest item
Mm,
that Tony Petitti and the Big Ten wants. They do want to eliminate some of the subjectivity that is involved in a committee, and they've had ads that are on it. I mean, Ward Manuel, Gary Barta going back, Barry Alvarez, Tom Osborne at the very beginning. They've been a part of this, but it's not easy to try to separate these teams when they're from different regions, they're different conferences, and they have different conference schedules. And so when you're talking about a 10-2 team in the Big Ten versus a 10-2 team from the SEC, there's not. Sometimes they've maybe they've one team has played another team in that league that they've played, but there's really no common elements. It's hard to really determine who's doing what. So they figure if each of those conferences, which are clearly the best two, which clearly have the over, and I kind of went through the numbers here over the last 11 years. The Big Ten and SEC had by far the most teams that are under their current alignment that would have qualified for the 16-team playoff. That they figure that they, not just deserve it, but they've earned the right to have four teams qualify under the way they want to do it. So that therefore they're not in an argument season, and the SEC is very good at that. But when you're also combining, the Big Ten plays 9 conference games, the SEC plays 8, and both teams are 10-2, and one played 3 nobodies in the non-con, and the other team played 2. That sometimes the strength of schedule gets washed out, and so that they want to eliminate the subjectivity that's involved with it as much as possible outside of a stray at-large team at the bottom. So that's one of the main goals the Big Ten had with this plan.
Scott, so one of my biggest concerns here, you brought it up with the conference, number of conference games, right? I have this terrible feeling that, as somebody who lives and works in Big Ten country, that the SEC will not bow to both a 9-game conference schedule and an automatic qualifier model. Do you think there's a world in which the Big Ten gets both of the things that it wants?
No, probably not. I think now that 2 months after Destin, where the SEC just kind of nuked all the good feelings
Yeah.
when at its conference meetings, that the Big Ten put on a big, full court press on the SEC, their 8-game model, what they want to do with the automatic qualifiers. And my guess is, no, they're not going to get what they all want. And I think the SEC, and in traditional fashion, probably more for the region as much as it is for the conference, that now they're going to balk on anything the Big Ten wants them to do. That they're not going to say, oh, okay, I guess we should probably go to 9 games. Now they're going to be really stubborn about it, probably think, and which they have. They've said our 8-game conference season is more difficult than any other conference's 9, which is laughable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess if I could see a compromise here, and I think it's a small one. I think it's one that the Big Ten should accept and probably pursue, is that instead of 4 guaranteed spots, go with 3, and then for them 2 for the other conferences, but have it where that 3-game proposal at the end, 1 versus 2, 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5, that all 3 of those are automatically the winners are automatically in the playoff. Because if you could do that, two's going to get in anyway as an at-large.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the compromise that makes the most sense for the Big Ten, but because they have to agree. The SEC and Big Ten have to agree on something. So that's probably my guess right now.
Scott, do you see this as more of a fluid situation that year after year we're going to be talking about different college football playoff models, or have you gotten the sense that the Big Ten, the SEC, the powers that be are trying to find a definitive model that will be used forever, right? Like till the end of time, that they're going to keep using the same college football playoff model? Or do you think that this is something that they might try one year, readjust it for the next year, or do something a little different and adjust it year in and year out?
I think that they want to have a model that works and is consistent. I can see little tweaks along the way. That's something that's definitely. I mean, we're seeing that going into year two with the buys. Where last it was supposed to be 4 conference champions the first run, and we saw how that worked out. So now that they are going straight seeding the rest of the way, so I would anticipate there would be some sort of tweaks along the way if necessary, but I also think that they want a model that is consistent, and at least for like a 6-year period beginning next year, because it's going to I can't imagine that it stays at 12 teams. I think everybody has moved on to a 16-team model, and it's just a matter of how do you make it work, and so my guess is that they want to have the parameters in place. And then if there needs to be a tweak in 2028, that they'll do it, but it'll be a 6-year situation. Now, what can happen in 10 or 15 or 20 years? Who knows? I mean, will they go to like 24? Kind of like FCS or some of the others? Yeah, I can see that happening. But I think for right now, they want to explore and go forward with a 16-team model and have the guts of it done and in place for a long period of time.
Scott, if you could choose one of the things that the Big Ten wants, since we both agree they're not getting both, if they could choose 9-game conference schedule for everybody or their preferred playoff model, which do you think they'd choose?
I think they'd choose their playoff model because if they could get 4 guarantees, and that allows it to be an access-based tournament rather than one that's based on the selection committee. And if they can get 4 in, at that point, if the SEC can get 4 in for sure and the Big Ten can get 4 in for sure, it doesn't really matter if they play 6 conference games, 8, 10, whatever. I think it works for what the Big Ten wants to do. And then it just comes down to those last at-large spots, which I mean, I think they're important, certainly, but they're also kind of like, well, our 5th best team against their 5th best team. Neither one's probably going to win the national title, so you're probably, be okay with that. So I think that would be the one that I would choose because, and here's where the Big Ten's at a detriment, and it's historically this way, is the SEC is very persuasive in how it brings out the rhetoric, and it had so much success in the previous 20 years that it's easy to see that they could say, hey, we're the toughest conference. It means more here. It just means more. And people buy into it. And a lot of times you get down to the end and it's like, well, yeah, but they play in the SEC. And so they'll deserve it over that 5th Big Ten team. So I think if you can get the 4 guarantees and then plus an opportunity to have a debate for the 5th team, I think you'll take that.
Scott, as you kind of referred to it just as like the Big Ten or Tony Petitti, when you say it that way, is that just like the conference itself that's wanting this type of model, or is it truly uniformity across the conference with all of the coaches, ADs, and such in college football in the Big Ten that prefer this model? Or is there some dissension? Are there some programs that have been maybe whispering a little bit more, saying, hey, this isn't exactly what we want, but we'll buy in because this is what's best for the Big Ten?
There's been almost a unanimous unanimity on this, that basically that the conference is all in on it. And from what Tony Petitti said, he goes, they're the ones that determine the model, that the coaches from day one, that they were concerned about lack of access to the playoff, that there was, with the Big Ten playing 9 conference games, that it wasn't given enough of a swag when it came to the playoff committee. That it's like, hey, we're playing an extra conference game, which means half the teams lose an extra game versus the ACC, but specifically the SEC. And if there's one incident that really stands out, or one era, it's the 2017 and 18 seasons, where it was a 4-team model, but Ohio State lost one conference game. One was at Iowa, one was at Purdue, and yet they were outside the playoff. And part of what they were concerned about was those were an East Division team playing on the road at the West. That would have been an extra game, that if they were playing an 8-game schedule, they wouldn't have played that game. And sometimes, as we all know, when you get into conference season, crazy things can happen against opponents, versus if you're playing that SEC layup game, Mercer or Furman or whatever the team is, that you can kind of rest up guys, and then you don't have those opportunities to fall. And so they were concerned that, hey, our margin of error is a little bit smaller than everybody else's. And so they are the ones in the very beginning, even before Oregon and Washington joined, that started pushing for a plan like this. Now, they understand there comes some risk. I mean, last year, the 3-6 game, for instance, would have been Indiana-Iowa. Now, I expect Indiana to win that game. However, what if, Kirk Ferentz special, where they drag him in the mud and it ends up 13-10 because there's a lot of turnovers and stuff, then Indiana probably would have gotten left out. It wouldn't have been an at-large team. But they accept that simply because they feel like with the Big Ten being so big, you don't play everybody, schedules are uneven, that is worth the risk to make sure you have access for everybody. Because there could be some, like last year, maybe Illinois would have been a better example if Illinois was playing Indiana, where Illinois loses to Oregon, Penn State, and Minnesota, which was an 8-win team, so it was a pretty good team. And then Indiana had its schedule, which I thought was, they really got, I thought it was unfair, the criticism, because of the teams they played. But still, they were 8-1, and yet they didn't have kind of the depth of schedule that other teams did, and that was probably a fair way to determine who was in the playoff versus just straight up by the conference alignment.
Scott, I did think it was interesting. You brought up that there are years in which the Big Ten would actually be giving up certain spots. I mean, I believe you said every year of the college football playoff rankings, they would have gotten at least their 4 teams in, but there were years that they would have gotten as many as 6 in. Whereas on the other side of it, the SEC actually had multiple years where they would have gotten less than 4 teams in, while they did max out at 7. So I think some people look at the automatic qualifier model as, oh, this is a gift to the Big Ten or whoever because they wouldn't normally get 4 teams in. But it's actually, I mean, they were giving things up more often than the SEC would be if we went back historically, right?
Yeah, for sure. And really, I think the SEC looks at it, and it's understandable that I think both teams would be in great shape in this model to get as many teams as possible. And actually, the SEC under a guaranteed model might lose a few more spots to the Big 12 and the ACC, frankly, under that model. But the Big 10 has been very consistent, and it would have lost a couple of teams too along the way. But it, the problem has been the messaging. I think the problem for the Big 10 is when the SEC meetings took place, and Lord knows I tried to talk to them about this. And I said that right after that, they needed to come out and start talking, and they needed to explain what the model is, why it's good for college football, everybody, not just the Big 10. And instead, they chose silence. They figured, well, let's just handle this in the background. And if you do that, then you leave that power vacuum open. And the SEC filled it twice, both at its conference meetings in May, and then also at SEC media days a couple weeks ago. So I think that's the problem for the Big Ten, is a messaging issue, and it comes across as arrogant and self-serving, even though it isn't. And I would say that my colleagues are decidedly on the other side of me. I think the system would work. They obviously do not. So I think that right now they have lost the narrative, and that's a self-own in some respects now.
Scott, you brought up something there that has bothered me a lot, because it does seem like the SEC dominates really lately in only one area, and that is the talking part of the game, right? I mean, they've been very good for the last 20 years, whatever. But I mean, and I know this isn't even totally fair to do, but like if you take Alabama out of the equation, like if you just remove Nick Saban from the equation, we're talking about a whole other different thing, right? Like we're having a whole other conversation about what college football looks like. And so, I sit here and I go, okay, really the talking part is the thing that the SEC is best at, and they've got ESPN with a vested interest in the SEC to continue to push those narratives. Like, because if I'm being totally honest with you, a 5-11 model in a perfect world, I prefer, where the best teams get in.
Yep.
There might be a year where only 2 Big Ten teams get in, and the five good teams out of the SEC, and maybe 4 out of the ACC or whatever, right? But I don't trust the people involved with making the decisions in order for that to actually play out well every year. And a big part of that to me is this marriage between the SEC and ESPN, where they just always have the loudest mouthpiece and they never miss an opportunity to use it.
Yeah, you're right on, and they've been successful at that. I mean, in some ways, there's a political party and its network that really does a good job of that as well. And I would say the same thing here. When you take it, I think what the Big Ten has to guard against, and the perfect example is what happened to Indiana last year. And Indiana was 8-1 in the Big Ten, led the country in in what point differential and run defense. I mean, had a fantastic and looked the part. I was at the Nebraska game. Certainly looked the part at different times of the season, and yet when it loses by 10 points to Notre Dame, the narrative is, oh, this team shouldn't have gotten in over a trio of 9-3 SEC teams. Alabama went on the road and they lost to Vanderbilt and they lost to Oklahoma. Both of them were 6-6. Ole Miss lost to a 3-9 or 4-8 Kentucky that won one SEC game. When you look at that and you're like, there's, the ESPN engine is pushing that narrative, that you've got to combat that. And the problem is that this is the one sport where perception matters. Because when you look at it, none of it doesn't matter at all in the pros, except for like MVP voting. It doesn't matter in college basketball really, because it's going to 68. Will it go to 76? Well, if you're 19-14, who cares, right? That's your fault for not being able to get in the tournament. But this one is different, and perception matters because you may swing 1 or 2 people, and ultimately. You look at last year, if it would have been a 16-team field, SEC would have gotten 6. Illinois would have gotten left out, and Illinois went and beat South Carolina. Michigan beat Alabama in the postseason. The Big Ten went 5-1 head-to-head with the SEC in the postseason. Yet all we've heard, for especially the last couple of months, is the SEC is still the best conference. The SEC is this, that, and the other thing. And it's like the Big Ten could have come out beating on its chest saying, we won the last 2 titles.
Mm-hmm.
We went head-to-head in the postseason. We won all this stuff, but instead didn't. And so it lost the narrative. And I think that's the problem that the Big Ten has to really overcome, because when you get to that last team, even in an at-large situation, it's going to have to combat that. And that's going to be something the Big Ten is going to have to be prepared for. And it's not as good, period. It's just not as good as the SEC when it comes to the talking points and having the blowhorn behind it.
Scott, you mentioned all that perception and everything, but is there anything that behooves the SEC and maybe more the Big Ten in this conversation to empower the conferences below them, the ACC and especially the Big 12? Is there anything that maybe that they would try to get in cohorts with another conference to try to see if they can keep, knocking down the shield of the SEC in that perception conversation? Or is it in the best interest of the Big Ten to only worry about themselves?
That's interesting, because the Big 12 would be the biggest beneficiary of any of the leagues with a guaranteed setup. The last 2 years, it would have had 1 team in the playoffs. Last year would have been Arizona State, and I think they would have been 15th or something like that. So because it's an incredibly entertaining and interesting league, and there's a lot of depth to it, but there's not a lot of teams that are going to make that big jump. I mean, they're going to have like a slugfest of 10-2 teams, and then when they compare it head to head with the Big Ten and SEC with those same records, they're going to lose almost every time. I'm kind of baffled by Brett Yormark really pushing the narrative for a 5+11 because chances are over a 5-year period they're going to have like 6 or 7 teams in the playoffs as opposed to 10. And the ACC's got a little bit more of a boost, but not much. Actually, it'd be more, they both have the same number of among the teams that are in their current leagues. And I thought Jim Phillips might be a little bit more on the Big Ten side just because of his background, but instead he's kind of pushed the 5+11 plan. It's going to be interesting because they're both going against their own self-interest on this. I think if they are quiet or if they push for something behind the scenes, maybe, but I think the only there's only like 2 ways that could make this working with those 2 leagues, and number one is, again, if the Big Ten takes it down to say 3 guarantees for the Big Ten and SEC, and all of them being those play-in games, then it works for the Big Ten. Or maybe they offer up a 5th spot to those leagues and said, there's a combination of 5 guarantees, 2 for each league, and then the best team left out. Then maybe that would also help them swing it. But they don't have any kind of veto power. It's all the Big Ten and SEC that decides the next realm, and the SEC's, from what I was told from kind of off the record, I guess, is the SEC wants an open forum because it feels like it can get more spots, and part of it is because they can argue better than everybody else.
Yeah, Scott, I do wonder, I have wondered, I know that like you said, the ACC and Big 12 don't actually have any power here because they sort of ceded that to the SEC and Big 10 in the decision-making process. But I do wonder how much the ESPN affiliation with the Big 12 and especially the ACC has to do with sort of them just kind of getting in line behind Big Brother with SEC and just saying like, well, if this is what ESPN and SEC want, then we better just kind of kowtow to their desires here.
I don't think that's the case in this situation.
Okay.
It does sometimes pop up, but I think in this situation, it's more of admitting you're a junior partner as opposed to, and the perception of we're not as good, we're not as big, and not as important. And really, it wasn't that long ago, even though maybe the other 2 leagues made more money. But the Big 12 when it had Texas and Oklahoma, and then of course going back even further, and then the ACC when Florida State and Clemson were winning titles, that you could actually say that they were on, at least competitively, on a similar plane. Now that's not the case, and they don't really want to admit that. So I think that's the point right now, which is they feel like, hey, this is an open selection process as opposed to a closed one, and even though it benefits us to make sure we at least get a bird in the hand versus 2 in the bush, but at the same time, they're going to be defeating their own self-interest, especially the Big 12, because I see a situation where if they have a 10-2 team and they're arguing against a 9-3 SEC team, now they're going to lose.
Yeah, they're not getting in.
Yeah, I mean Kansas State or BYU, they're 10-2, and Alabama, Georgia are 9-3. They're going to lose that. They're going to lose it almost every time. Same thing with the Big Ten even. So I think that's something that they've got to be very careful about when ultimately they've played this public game.
Yeah, the Big 12 baffles me in particular because I can at least see an argument like the ACC. They say, okay, if Florida State, Miami, and Clemson are all good in the same year, like we deserve 3 teams in or whatever, right? And so maybe they've got that in the back of their mind, even though that's, over the course of all 3 teams being in the league, that's never happened at the same time, but whatever. But you sit there and you go, okay, at least you've got 3 teams you feel like are power brokers in this sport still. Maybe you think that's worth the standing your ground on. Literally every good team is like every power program has left the Big 12 at this point.
Yeah.
Like I just really don't understand what they're doing.
You don't think Utah's a power program
I
anymore?
love Utah, big Kyle Whittingham guy, but I don't know that they're. Like you said, Scott, 10-2 Utah isn't getting in over 9-3 anybody from the SEC.
Exactly, and And that's the competition. I think it's a fun league. I think there's a lot of really good teams. I mean, Iowa State won 11 games last year. Utah has been to Rose Bowls when it was in the Pac-12. Kyle Whittingham. I mean, they're a really good program. I think they're kind of the equivalent to Iowa in a lot of ways. And if Iowa was in the Big 12, it'd affect them just exactly the same way. And so they've got to be really careful with that, because the Big 12, they played, their current allotment has played a total of 2 playoff games over 11 years, and that was TCU. And the second one didn't go so well, 65-3, against Georgia. Now they did beat Michigan, but that good for them. But I mean, the Georgia game was not a good game. So you're going to have to overcome that perception too, which is, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, Baylor, TCU. They're all really good programs. Of course, Utah and BYU. They're really interesting, fun, competitive programs that deserve the right to be in there. But I don't think anybody's going to be predicting them to win a championship, even if they're 12-0. And so being 10-2, but I think what the Big Ten is guarding against, and this comes back to it, is let's take Iowa State plays this year, meet 2, and let's say Iowa goes to Jack Trice and wins by a field goal, but Iowa plays 4 teams that won 11 games last year. They go 9-3. Maybe the Cyclones go 11-2. They lose the Big 12 championship again. The committee might actually say, well, that was an early game. Iowa State won 11 games. They deserve that last spot versus the Big Ten. Iowa went going 9-3, and Iowa's like, hey, we played, Indiana, we played Oregon, we played Penn State, we went on the road, played Nebraska, we played, USC, all these other teams. Our schedule's so much more difficult, and then they're looking at it, well, but they're 11-win program. That's what the Big Ten is trying to guard against here. So I think that's something that they've got to be cognizant of, and that's why they're trying to push for the guaranteed plan. They don't want to get iced out simply because they get penalized for having a deeper league, and not in the case of the Big 12, but the other 2 leagues, but more league games.
That's Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. Scott, great stuff as always. We appreciate the time. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.